Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to Talk with Tubbs, a petrolhead's perspective. As always, I'm your host, Tapelo, aka Tubbs, and I'm going to talk you through this podcast that deals with everything motoring. We're going to talk what's new on the market, what's old on the market, what's good on the market, and also what's bad on the market. Then we're also going to delve into some motorsport, but more focused on my favorite form of motorsport, Formula One. We're going to talk driver lineups, what we feel, react, but most of all, I'm trying to give you a petrol head's perspective. Words that come from someone who's as passionate about the industry as anyone I know. So as ever, let me not waste your time. Here we go. Talk with Tubbs is a go. And just like that, I'm back again for a new episode of Talk with Tubbs, a petrol head's perspective. Now, I took a social media break for a bit, and I kind of needed that break because now I'm back, I'm refreshed, I'm positive again. Look, I missed quite a few things on that break, especially when it comes to car news and what was launched locally and stuff. But if you're listening to this, then you've probably already seen that and you know what's what. So I'm not gonna waste your time and draw back on that. A lot of the stuff that was launched locally, I had already spoken about on the podcast when they were launched internationally. So I ideally the new M3, M4. But look, I'm not going to waste your time. Look, this podcast is going to be based so much on Formula One. It's really Formula One heavy. But before we get into Formula One, I am just going to touch on last night's Moto GP race. Now, man, the race was brilliant. The race was so good because it was so close. It was so competitive. At any moment throughout the race, you felt as though anyone within the top six could win the race. I watched the race from about lap 4 because I was watching the Formula One race before. But more to come on that, it was a good race. And to get into a MotoGP race, which is not something I watch week in, week out. I watch when I have time. And luckily, last night I did have time. So I did watch the MotoGP race. And trust me when I tell you, that race was so close, so close, that even in the final moments, anything could have happened. Uh, I'm gonna tell you this: the finishing position for the top six was Maverick Vinales in 1, Johan Zarco in 2, Francesco Bagnaia in 3, Joan Mir in 4th, Fabio Quartararo in 5th, and Alex Rins in 6th. Now, Marc Marquez is not there, and if you don't know, he got injured last season. I think he injured his shoulder in a very bad accident, and he still hasn't fully recovered. The medical timeline on his recovery is expected to be around round 3 or 4 of this current season, so we'll just wait to see. But he's been so dominant that it's refreshing to see. It's refreshing to see the sport go on without him, but also at the same time, it's so different to see him not there, not racing. It's Marc Marquez. He is Mr. MotoGP. But I want to touch on something. Jean Mir made a pass around 4 corners before the end of the race. 4 corners in it. And he made a pass and he was second. And I thought, okay, he's got a podium in the bag. He is a defending champion from last year. So I was like, yeah, he's got this. But to show how close this race was, coming into the final corner, Joan Mir makes a mistake on the brakes. He just brakes a little too long and he goes deep into the corner. But the consequence of that is everyone was so close to him that on the run down the start-finish straight, he loses so much momentum just by that simple mistake that he actually finishes the race in 4th. He gets jumped by Joan Zarco and Francesco Bagnaia, who eventually finished on the podium together. But I think that was the most interesting thing to watch about this race is how close it was and how suspenseful it was. That for the last 10 laps, you always felt like something was bound to happen. You always felt like someone was going to jump someone for positions. And I know in the end, it seemed rather comfortable for Maverick Vinales because he got the pass and he sat in first and he kind of dictated the pace from there. But he wasn't far ahead than the rest of the guys, and you knew if he made a mistake, he was getting jumped as well. And for the guys behind, it became ever increasingly so close. So the finish of that race was so good. I thoroughly enjoyed that race. And look, if you have time and you want to catch an enjoyable race, try and find a Moto GP race. Trust me, you will not regret watching it. It's enthralling, it's captivating. It's one of the best racing you'll ever see. I guarantee that.
And radio check.
It's Friday then. It's Saturday, Sunday. What? It's Friday then. Saturday, Sunday. What? Yeah, it's okay.
And just like that, thanks to that Lando clip from last season, that's the perfect segue to Formula One. Now, being off, I never actually got to react to Formula One testing, and I thought I'd do this differently. I always say, and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, it's very difficult to judge performance based on testing. The reason being, teams will do different things on different days. Teams will run different programs. Some people might be on an all around pace kind of program, and some people will be checking their endurance. Some people will be doing suspension setup. Some people will be doing aero work. Some people, like, especially for a season where we've had so many driver changes, testing was interesting, but it was also quite different because a lot of drivers had to get used to new systems for their teams, new cars, just around a different thing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to react to both the race and testing. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk about the team in inverse order from last year's finishing on the Constructors' Championship. And I'm going to talk about their new drivers, and I'm going to talk about their car, and I'm going to talk about what I saw in testing and what I saw in racing. Because I always feel like the race is really the first indication where you know how a team is going to perform, where you know where the team is, and just how the year will pan out for them. So, first of all, I'm just going to talk about the race in a broad sense. This race was everything we wanted in the past few years. We wanted a race that was going to be competitive, not only in the midfield, because we know Formula 1.5, as social media has dubbed it, has been very competitive. And I think this year it's setting up to be even more competitive. But we also wanted competition at the front of the grid between first, second, and third. And to see Max Verstappen and Red Bull take it to Mercedes, Hamilton, Bottas, that competition, that battle, that challenge is what we as fans, as spectators, want from the sport. And trust me, this race did not disappoint. If this race is the precursor or the trailer for what we should expect for the rest of the season, my goodness, what a season we are going to have in Formula One this year. Because it's so competitive. You at differing moments of the race, you feel like someone else is going to win. It's never clear cut anymore. Well, from this race, seemingly. So, trust me, this race was a good one. It was a proper race. It might not have been as entertaining, not entertaining, but I think actionable. There was not as much action as other races, but this race combined everything we loved about Formula One. You had drivers driving to the best of their abilities. You had strategy calls. You had just drivers showing off what they are and how good they can be. So I said this to a friend this morning. This race was everything we love about Formula One. It's literally everything we cry about when it comes to Formula One. So, without further ado, that's a bit on the race, but I said I'm going to touch on testing and racing. Let's start with the team that finished in 10th place last season, and that is Williams. So, what do you say about Williams, right? The easiest way to put this is when Williams was acquired by Darlington last year, I felt that was a good move. And I did say this on the podcast back then that if it enables Williams to be more competitive, then it's a good thing. I know the history, I know the prestige, but looking at Williams in testing, it was so difficult for them because they really look like they're behind the pack, as always. But I think more confusing. And during my break, I listened to a lot of podcasts, mainly focused on Formula One. But one of the things that came out was that Williams were going with a very risky aero setup for this year and car setup, essentially. That the car would excel at certain races, it would be good and competitive at those races, and then at some races, it would be, through lack of a better word, a total shitbox. Look, the standards of Formula One are so high that a car languishing where Williams is a shitbox. And trust me, the car is not even that. It's just the standards are so high in Formula One. But that's a risky strategy. But it could pay off for Williams if it actually works. Because Williams finished last year's Constructors' Championship with 0 points. 0 points. So if they want to be competitive at certain races throughout the season, where they feel they could get points. Whether they finish ninth or third, it doesn't matter. But if they are in a situation where they can nick a point at a certain track and they can nick 2 points at another track, that's already far better than what they achieved last year. And look, they retained their driver lineup of George Russell and Nicholas Latifi. And I think it's a solid foundation for them, especially considering the large changes that are coming next year. So as much as testing wasn't promising for them, the race wasn't promising either. We know how twitchy that car can be and how susceptible it is to crosswinds. So, Williams are in for a tough ride this season, and they've done a very brave strategy call at the end of the day. But if it actually turns out and it works, then you have to congratulate, first of all, the courage to accept such a risk, but just the general sense of progression, the general sense that Williams might be heading somewhere. Let's hope next year's wholesale regulations favor them and they can be competitive towards the midfield. But one thing I will tell you is that, seemingly from what has gone on from testing and racing this in the first race in Bahrain, Williams are not the last car on the grid. They are definitely not. And that brings us on to the team that finished ninth last year in the Constructors' Championship, and that is Haas. Now, man, Haas has been put in very difficult financial situations. They had to pull a lot of strings just to have a car on the grid this year. And I think we saw that perfectly in Formula One Drive to Survive with the certain decisions that Gunther Steiner, the team principal, had to make in letting both their drivers go in the names of Kevin Magnussen and Romain Grosjean, and then come back with a new driver lineup for this year just to get in sponsorship. And their new drivers are Mick Schumacher, yes, the son of former Formula One racer, seven-time world champion Michael Schumacher, and controversial figure Nikita Mazepin. I'm going to skip on the controversies of him. Twitter is your friend, Google is your friend. But I think this is going to be a very tough season for Haas. And this is why I said Williams are no longer the last team on the grid. Haas will be that team this year because they've got two rookies essentially as their driver lineup, right? And that's not to say they're bad. I don't think they are. More on that in a bit. But you've got two rookies that you're expecting them to challenge, but you've also said that you will not be developing the car at all this year. What you're seeing now is what you're going to see from Haas for the rest of the year. They've taken their whole focus to the 2022 regulations. So that means they are going to have a difficult year this year. They are going to languish around the last places. Now, then you get to testing and the car's a problem. The car's a problem, things just aren't working out. You skip testing, you go into the first race as Haas, and Nikita Mazepin spins, crashes out of the race. Look, it's just adding salt to the wound. It's making a difficult situation just that much more difficult, right? I know people are shitting on Mazepin right now on social media. Not about the controversies he's had in recent times, but because of the mistake he made. He went on the power coming out of turn 3, and he just lost the car. And I tweeted this that, look, and I think I sent this to a friend actually, that Haas and Bahrain seem to have a horrible relationship. Because remember, this is the same track where we had that spectacular crash for Romain Grosjean last year. So the car looks really difficult. The car looks really difficult, and the guys are going to struggle. The drivers are going to struggle, no doubt about it. I think it's one of those things where it's kind of the same thing that happened with George Russell, just to a worse extent, where you're coming into the sport and you're coming in to a team that is really not performing. And as a rookie, you want a solid foundation. You want a team, you want a car that's just going to make it easier for you. But this Haas car, it's not. I think it's making it worse. And the way Nikita Mazepin lost the rear of that car and crashed, it just puts into doubt whether he's ready to come into Formula One. Now, I can't be the guy to say whether he's ready or not, but I think the fact that Michael Schumacher also had a spin kind of alleviates a bit of the pressure on Mazepin, because it shows that the platform as a whole is a bit difficult. And to talk on Michael Schumacher, because Mick Schumacher, sorry, MSCH, it's the same. It gets confusing. But to talk on Mick, he is Formula 2 champion. And I think, as a lot of people have pointed out, when we put the emotions and nostalgia aside, in recent times, he is a Formula 2 champion that came into Formula 1, but he isn't the most convincing. In recent times, we've seen Formula 2 champions like George Russell, like Charles Leclerc, and when those guys moved up to Formula 1, they were dominant in their Formula 2 season. And Mick really wasn't that dominant. His results don't look that great. But he is champion nevertheless, and there's something to be said for that. I think it also goes with how competitive the field was last year in Formula 2. So, look, these guys are going to have a difficult time, and I think it's not going to get any easier as the year goes by. Instead, I think it's going to get more difficult. They're going to get more frustrated at the lack of opportunities and at the lack of performance. But what I will say is, if the team eventually does stay in Formula One, they really should just give them time to get comfortable. If this year is written off as a fail, then so be it. And if they come back in 2022, given the new regulations, and they are somewhat competitive, fair enough, that's good, that's fine. But this year, I do not see any positives for Haas. I see them as number 10 in the Constructors' Challenge this year. Now, going to number 8, Alfa Romeo Racing. They've returned their driver lineup as well. You've got Kimi Raikkonen and Antonio Giovinazzi. And looking at testing, it's a bit of hit and miss. You know, they've got promising moments, and there were times where you thought the car looked stable and you thought this would work and that would work. And then you get into the race and look, they're thereabouts. You know, it's a tough one for them. I think it's going to be a tough season, because even after the race, granted, they actually finished really well in the race. They finished with Raikkonen in 11th and Giovinazzi in 12th. So I think that's a good foundation for the team. They are battling somewhere within that midfield. And look, a lot of things just happen in this race. But I think they've got positive to look forward to this year. They might be in a good position to nick points at certain races. So not a lot to say about this team, apart from the fact that it can be hit and miss. But I think for the most part, as they did last year, they will have more positives than they do negatives. So if the drivers can do what they did last year and just try and be consistent and be there or thereabouts, they will come away with points. And if they finish 8th again, that's fine. That's where I think they're going to finish again. But I think it's an 8th that will be very promising to the team and just further cements how positive the overall outlook on the team is. And it's something that they can look forward to building upon. 7th in World Constructors for 2019 is AlphaTauri. Now, this was one of the biggest talking points of Formula One testing, because they lost Daniil Kvyat as their second driver, and they have a driver lineup made of Pierre Gasly, who was exceptional last season, and Yuki Tsunoda, another rookie from Formula 2, who looks to be a really promising driver. And the good thing about that is they've got 2 drivers who are promising, who seem to be on form. But another thing is their car looks to be one of the most competitive cars on the midfield for Formula One this year. The car looks to be so good. It looks to be so positive. It looks to be so stable. And whatever Honda has done in the offseason to the power units that are given to Red Bull and AlphaTauri, my goodness, what a car this is going to be for the midfield. I think car is going to be so competitive, and the team as a whole is going to be competitive. Last year they finished 7th. I really don't see them finishing 7th this year again. I see them going higher, possibly 6th or even 5th. In the race, Yuki Tsunoda, the first Japanese driver in a long time to get points. It's been a long time since a Japanese driver got points in Formula One. And you go there, you finished 9th in your debut race. Well done, young man. And I can say young man because he really is younger than me, so it feels weird. But he was brilliant in testing, and we could see how he was driving. And like I said, the car looked bulletproof. The car was one of the big performers in Formula One testing, and that the same can be said in this race. That is a very positive result for Yuki Tsunoda to finish in 9th place. Yes, Gasly had a bit of a shocker. He finished in 17th, but we know there was that contact which caused him to lose his front wing, and that kind of accident in Formula One means you're definitely out of the running for points or a decent finish, nevertheless. So he finished 17th, but I don't think we should read too much into that. It's just a collision, a racing incident that happened, and it put him out. If the car is as good as it was in testing, and seemingly it is, and the drivers can be as confident as they were last year, and Tsunoda coming into this year, they are in the running for a very good and exceptional performance this year. That car looks to be great. The team culture looks to be working, and the drivers seem to be comfortable and ready to rock. I have to say it. I don't want Pierre Gasly to return in Red Bull in whatever capacity, because whatever he's doing at AlphaTauri from last season seems to be working and seems to be going well for him. So AlphaTauri as number 7 last year, they are definitely going to go up this year. I don't see them finishing in 7th. I think they are going to finish either 5th or 6th. So I see improvement for them. 6th in the Constructors' Championship for last year, Ferrari. Now, very good lineup this year. One of my favorite lineups for 2021 in the form of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Now, look, if you watch Formula One, you know Charles Leclerc is one of the best drivers on the grid at the moment. Carlos Sainz is a driver that I actually rate quite high. He might not be consistent enough in qualifying to get the positions, but his racecraft and his race intelligence makes me rate the guy as a really good driver. And I think Ferrari has a promising foundation in the driver setup for 2021 and beyond. The biggest problem for Ferrari is their car. It's not their drivers. Look, Ferrari are still languishing where they kind of were last year. And I think for Ferrari to get decent positions again, it's going to be the same situation as we saw last year, where either Charles Leclerc has to outperform that car consistently like he would last year. We know what he did last year, and he's already done it this race as well. Just drag that car to P4 in qualifying, and we're like, what? What is happening? That's what they're going to need from him and Carlos Sainz, because on a competitive punch-for-punch basis, that car is not there. It's just not there. So they're going to struggle in terms of the car, but it looks promising. It looks to be slightly better than it was last year. Like I said, driver lineup is positive. The biggest letdown for me is the car. Testing, it was just all right. There's nothing really to get into it that much. But their finishes in the race, Charles Leclerc finished 6th and Carlos Sainz 8th. That's already a double points finish at the first race of the season. See what I mean? They're going to be there or thereabouts in that midfield. And I think this is where their driver lineup is going to be crucial. These guys are going to pull the weight for Ferrari going into next year. Where do I see them finishing this year in the Constructors? Probably around 6th. Probably where they finished last year in 6th place. I don't see that big an improvement. While the car has improved, it's just that the cars around them have improved even more. Fifth in the Constructors' Championship in 2019 was Renault, now with a name change to Alpine. And their driver lineup of Esteban Ocon, who has had a very promising Formula One career so far. You know, he was really highly rated and then he left the sport for 1 year, came back, but when he came back, I don't think he was there or thereabouts. Daniel Ricciardo outclassed him last year, but again, that's Danny Rick. And I don't think it got any easier for him because with Daniel Ricciardo leaving and going to McLaren, Fernando Alonso came in. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Fernando Alonso, but I cannot deny his talent and his resume, his CV as a driver. The man drives everything and he drives everything well. He's that good. I think the biggest problem with Alonso might be his attitude, which has always been his Achilles heel. But on track, he's one of the best guys to watch on any given day. So, Alpine, testing wasn't that positive for them. After testing, you really didn't know whether they were improving or they were going backwards. It just seems like a meh situation, considering they finished fifth last year. And coming into this race, after the race, they finished with Alonso having a DNF due to brake issues and Ocon finishing 13th. This is going to be important for them for the rest of the season. They always have to put themselves in contention to pick up the scraps because I think the car this year doesn't seem to be as competitive as it was last year. And that is why my prediction for them for 2021 in the Constructors' Championship is that they are going to fall down because I think AlphaTauri is a better car at the moment and I think it should be or could be the better car for the rest of the season. So I see Renault/Alpine struggling a bit this year, dropping down from their finish in 2019 on the Constructors' Championship to somewhere around 6th or 7th, no longer 5th. But I think, yeah, it's one of those teams that are leaving me hit and miss. You know, I'm just trying to figure out where they are. But yeah, it won't be that positive a season. But first race again, you know, like I said, this is why I'm comparing testing to the first race because things happen in testing and then things happen in the race. And there can be varying differences of performance. So, fourth place last year in the Constructors' Championship, Racing Point, now known as Aston Martin. And they've got a new driver lineup of Lance Stroll, let's be fair, he's not going anywhere, and Sebastian Vettel. Now, I still rate Vettel as a driver. I know in the past 2-3 seasons, he's had a lot of mistake and a lot of uncharacteristic moments, and it's not what you expect from a 4-time world champion. And this year, it seems as though the new regulations are really killing them as well. If you watch the race, Otmar Safnauer, the team principal, was going on and on and on with the commentary team about how the new floor regulations and air regulations are killing teams with a low rake philosophy, which they are, and seemingly have done nothing to the high rake philosophy cars, i.e. Red Bull and such. So, this car is very hit and miss because at the end of the race, you had a promising race for Lance Stroll and he finished in 10th, so that's a point finish. But you didn't have the same feeling when it came to the other side of the garage, which was Sebastian Vettel, and he finished in 15th. Again, Seb. Look, I was defending him all weekend leading up to this race, but the mistake he made when he ran into the rear of Esteban Ocon, and then he goes on the team radio and complains, why was he switching lanes? Mate, stick to your line. You had the inside line going into that corner. You could have braked later and you'd have the inside and you'd make it more difficult. I think it's the pressure on his shoulders. And it was the same in testing. The car really wasn't there in testing. It was a bad test for them. And I think it translated to what we saw from Vettel in the race. He's feeling insecure. He's feeling under pressure. And I don't think that's a good thing to get from a driver you're expecting to start pulling in consistent performances. And I think the aim for the team is to challenge the podium places. They want to be there. You know, last year they were the third fastest car on the grid, and they did finish fourth because of how brilliant McLaren was in the races. But This is a team that wants to challenge, and we've seen it multiple times. So I think Sebastian has to pick up these performances. You cannot have that kind of performance week in, week out. You know, over the years, we've been defending him and saying it's the Ferrari environment that wasn't working for him. It really wasn't. We still need to put a lot of the blame on him. Third in the constructors last year was McLaren, and I think they are picking up where they left off last season. They are seemingly the more consistent and just somewhat more balanced team in the midfield. I know the race results don't say it that well, but they are the team I'm targeting to finish third again in the Constructors' Championship. They have a good driver lineup of Lando Norris, who was really developing into a competitive racer last year, and Daniel Ricciardo, who is on his day one of the best drivers on the grid. We know how competitive he is. The last of the last break, the late of the late breakers. That's who he is. That's who he is. And I think they have a positive driver lineup. If they can keep the team energy and team synergy like it was last year, then I think that will be promising for them this year. They had a very good test, consistent, did what they had to do, got through what they had to do, and they got into the race and they got positive results. Lando Norris finished fourth and Daniel Ricciardo in seventh. Again, just strategies working out. It's the first race. You need to get used to a lot of things, but it's promising for this team going forward. I have faith. They are one of my favorite teams on the grid, so I'm satisfied with where they are now, and I don't see any other team jumping them for third in 2021's Constructors' Championship. Second, last year, was Red Bull. Coming into 2021, Red Bull is the best car on the grid by some margin. I read an article on the Formula One app, and it was talking about how the aero changes seemingly have affected the different cars based on rake philosophy. Red Bull, as we know, runs a high rake, which is the angle between the rear and the floor. If you look at the Red Bull car, the rear is higher than the front. That is high rake. And if you look at the Mercedes, it's generally flat. The Red Bull car is the best car on the grid. No doubt about that. And I think they've got a very competitive driver lineup this year with Max Verstappen, who is utterly brilliant. Brilliant driver, brilliant. And Sergio Perez, really good driver. And I think he will be exactly what Red Bull need this year if they are to challenge Mercedes consistently. The problem with Red Bull last year is that Alex Albon would fall down in the pack and he wouldn't be consistent or on pace enough to come back and protect Max Verstappen or even give Red Bull strategy options. Red Bull were always attacking with one driver. With Sergio Perez, I think they've got a second driver who's going to be competitive, who's going to be there at the front, and is going to give the team some competitive edge when it comes to team strategy and just all around pace on the track. In this race, it's a bit disappointing, particularly for Perez, who finished in fifth place. But that was because before the start of the race, he had control electronic unit problems. His control electronic unit was giving them problems, and that happened in the warm-up lap, even before, but it took heat again in the formation lap, and he started in last place. So that's a mega drive to go from starting in the pit lane to finishing fifth. See what I mean about Perez? He's there or thereabout. If that was Albon, who was in the same situation, he wouldn't have finished as high as Perez did. That means if Perez can get a good start in the coming races and he starts within the top 5, he gives Red Bull options. He gives Red Bull an attacking platform. Look, again, the power unit in that car seems to be so powerful this year, so powerful. We saw that in qualifying, we saw that in testing. They have the best car, and it is, at the current moment, far better than what Mercedes have. But then you look at the race, like I said, Perez, because of the unfortunate incidents with touch of unreliability, he finished in fifth, and Verstappen finished in second. Now, Verstappen finished in second, and a lot of people were saying he was going to win the race. At moments, I also thought he was going to win the race because the car is good. He's a brilliant driver. However, this is where the team that finished first last year Mercedes. How do I feel about Mercedes? And I'll come back to the Verstappen conversation again. Mercedes had a very difficult test. They are struggling with the rear balance of that car, and that comes with the aero philosophy for this year, the new regulations. They are struggling. The car is not where it needs to be. And that's what we saw from testing and reliability. However, and this is why I think Mercedes as a whole is the best Formula One team at the moment. Their rate of development and their systems at how they tackle problems is why they're consistently at the front. If you look at the way the car was driving in testing and you look at the way the car is driving now in the first race, there's a huge difference in the way the car handles. And that was with 2 weeks to develop the car, go through your data and use the information that you have. The next race is 3 weeks away. I'm not saying Mercedes will win that race or they'll be at the front of that race, but I can see them developing that car that they are closer to Red Bull. I still believe Mercedes will finish at the top when it comes to the Constructors' Championship, and I still believe Mercedes will win the title with Lewis Hamilton. Again, they retain the same driver lineup of Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. It's a consistent team and it seems to work. I think the biggest issue is Bottas needs to up his pace as well. He needs to give Mercedes options. He needs to give Mercedes a platform. Mercedes can use him and Hamilton to attack Verstappen, who seemingly is the car in front, who is the faster car. They can use both their drivers as an attacking platform, switch different strategies, make it more difficult for Red Bull to control that. Because if Bottas keeps falling away like he did in this race, Perez will be in front, and then it makes it so much more difficult for Mercedes and Hamilton because they will have to be defending against a two-pronged attack from Red Bull in terms of two drivers and possibly two different strategies. So Mercedes need to get Bottas firing. And as ever, I know Mercedes will improve that car. I definitely know. But, and this is where Lewis Hamilton is one of the best drivers on the grid. I've sang his praises enough. And he did what he did in Turkey, where he didn't look to be in contention for winning the race, but he eventually does. And in this race, I think it all came down to Lewis Hamilton's consistency and Lewis Hamilton's time management. I know people sing the praises of Sergio Perez when it comes to how good he is on tire management, but Lewis Hamilton is up there and he has to be one of the best to do it on the grid. It was a brilliant drive from Hamilton. The composure, the concentration, and just how he placed that car in defending against Verstappen. Look, the track limit conversation is a really difficult one, and I have a bit of problems with how it was implemented, but I will still say Verstappen was rightfully told to give the place back because he completed the overtake outside the track limits. If you want to see this properly, I suggest you follow Will Buxton Official on Twitter and on YouTube as well. He's my favorite Formula One journalist / personality. He explains this really well, and he had a thread yesterday on Twitter where he gave his 2 cents about the whole issue. I will say this, Mercedes and Hamilton has always called for a challenge. He said he would enjoy it, and I think this year is going to be a good season. It's panning out to be a fantastic season. Like I said, if this race was the trailer for what is to come this year, then we are in for a good season. The Hamilton versus Verstappen battle is what all Formula One fans have been crying out for, and it seems like we will have that battle this year. At the current, the standings are Lewis Hamilton 1, Max Verstappen 0. But don't count Verstappen out yet, because I don't think Mercedes will be as dominant as they were in previous years, unless they develop that car to hell and back. But we all know they will reach a point where they will give up on the development of the car and focus on the 2022 regulations. But what I will say, and this has been my preview and reaction to race 1 and testing, is that we are in for a good season. The midfield seems to be closer than ever. It's going to be more competitive. We're going to have competition as well in the front, and this is going to be a fantastic season going forward. So Formula One 2021, I'm looking forward to it really, really, really excited for the season. And I will say race 1 was something to behold. We have a 3-week break to go until race 2. I am sad, I know you are as well, but we just need to be patient. As always, that's been Tapelo on Talk with Taps, a petrol head's perspective. Follow me on my Twitter because I am back from my social media hiatus at Taps_Meriohle, THAPZ_MEREOHLE. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, share this podcast with friends. Subscribe to the channel because now I am back. I'm going to try and push these episodes out as regularly as possible. Thank you so much.